On April 2, 2025, the world watched as President Donald Trump unleashed a torrent of tariffs, sending shockwaves through the global economy. In a move that stunned allies and rivals alike, Trump announced a sweeping 10% tariff on all goods entering the United States. This blanket levy, he declared, was just the beginning. Trump's tariff storm targeted 185 countries, ensnaring friend and foe in a complex web of trade barriers. The tariffs, which took effect on April 9, 2025, marked a significant escalation of Trump's trade war, leaving businesses and consumers reeling from the sudden shift in the global trade landscape. These weren't just any tariffs. Trump unveiled what he called reciprocal tariffs, targeted penalties aimed at specific nations. Some countries found themselves slapped with levies exceeding 50%, a move designed to force concessions and rewrite the rules of international trade. As the news of Trump's tariff blitzkrieg spread, a sense of disbelief and apprehension gripped the global community. The ramifications of these unprecedented actions were far-reaching, leaving no corner of the world untouched. The immediate aftermath of Trump's tariff announcement was swift and brutal. China, long in the crosshairs of Trump's trade offensive, found itself on the receiving end of tariffs exceeding 50%. Beijing, in a tit-for-tat response, retaliated with a 34% tariff on a range of U.S. goods, signaling its resolve to weather the storm. The European Union, caught in the crossfire, faced a 20% blanket tariff, with additional levies on steel, aluminum, and automobiles. Brussels, while expressing dismay at Trump's actions, vowed to defend its interests, preparing counter-tariffs on a significant portion of U.S. exports. From Tokyo to Toronto, governments scrambled to assess the damage and formulate a response. Japan saw its benchmark Nikkei index plunge 4% as the news of a 10% tariff on its exports reverberated through its economy. South Korea, facing a 25% tariff, promised an all-out response, signaling its intent to fight fire with fire. The global trade war, once a distant threat, had become a stark reality, casting a long shadow over the global economy. The interconnectedness of global trade meant that the impact of Trump's tariffs would be felt far beyond the borders of the United States, with ripple effects touching businesses and consumers worldwide. The financial markets, barometers of global sentiment, reacted to Trump's tariff announcement with predictable alarm. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, a bellwether of American corporate strength, plummeted 1,700 points, a staggering drop that reflected the depth of investor anxiety. The tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite Index, already on shaky ground, tumbled into bear market territory, with the S&P 500, a broader measure of the U.S. stock market, shedding 17% of its value from its February high. The message was clear. Investors were bracing for a protracted trade war, and the potential consequences were dire. Futures contracts, bets on the future direction of the markets, pointed to further declines, with the S&P 500, Nasdaq and Dow all indicating significant drops. The sell-off, fueled by uncertainty and fear, was relentless, as investors sought refuge in safe haven assets like gold and government bonds. The market turmoil underscored the fragility of the global economy, 7 years into a fragile recovery from the 2020 recession. Trump's tariff salvo, coming at a time of heightened geopolitical tensions, had injected a potent dose of uncertainty into the markets, leaving investors grappling with the prospect of a global economic slowdown. In the face of mounting global criticism, Trump remained defiant, defending his tariff offensive as necessary to protect American jobs and reduce the trade deficit. The tariffs, he argued, were a negotiating tactic, a way to force other countries to the bargaining table and secure more favorable trade deals for the United States. Trump, never one to shy away from bold pronouncements, declared that the tariffs were generating billions of dollars in revenue for the U.S. Treasury, money that could be used to fund his domestic agenda. The tariffs, he insisted, were a sign of American strength, not weakness, a demonstration that the United States would no longer tolerate unfair trade practices. "We're making deals, not deficits," Trump declared in a characteristically blunt address to the nation. For too long, other countries have taken advantage of the United States, but those days are over. We're putting America first, and we won't back down. Trump's rhetoric, while resonating with his base of supporters, did little to assuage the concerns of economists and business leaders, who warned that the tariffs would ultimately harm the U.S. economy by raising prices for consumers and disrupting global supply chains. The trade war, they argued, was a dangerous gamble with potentially catastrophic consequences. Section 5. China's retaliatory strike. A dragon-awakened China, the world's second-largest economy, wasted no time in responding to Trump's tariff challenge. Beijing, long accustomed to dictating the terms of trade, was not about to back down from a fight, even one with the United States. In addition to its retaliatory tariffs, China began to explore other avenues to pressure the United States. The de minimis loophole, a trade rule that had allowed small packages from China to enter the U.S. with minimal tariffs, was abruptly closed, dealing a blow to the burgeoning e-commerce industry. China, holding vast reserves of U.S. Treasury bonds, hinted at the possibility of dumping these assets, a move that could send shockwaves through the global financial system. The message was clear: China had the economic firepower to inflict pain on the United States, and it was not afraid to use it. Perhaps most ominously, China began to restrict the export of rare earth elements, crucial components in a wide range of high-tech products, from smartphones to fighter jets. The United States, heavily reliant on Chinese rare earths, found itself in a vulnerable position, its technological edge suddenly at risk. Section 6. Europe pushes back, a continental divide. The European Union, a bloc of 27 nations with a combined GDP rivaling that of the United States, found itself caught in the crossfire of Trump's trade war. Brussels, while eager to avoid a full-blown trade conflict, was not prepared to let Trump's tariffs go unanswered. The EU, after careful deliberation, announced plans to impose a 20% counter-tariff on a wide range of U.S. goods, from bourbon to Harley-Davidson motorcycles. The move, while calibrated to inflict economic pain on key U.S. industries, was also designed to send a message: the EU would not be bullied. The trade spat with the United States exposed deep divisions within the EU, with some member states, particularly those reliant on exports to the U.S., urging caution, while others, led by France and Germany, favored a more confrontational approach. The trade war, coming at a time of heightened political uncertainty in Europe, threatened to further undermine the EU's already fragile unity. The bloc, grappling with Brexit and the rise of populism, now faced a new challenge: navigating the treacherous waters of a global trade war. Section 7. Global backlash. From Tokyo to Toronto. The shockwaves from Trump's tariff tsunami reverberated around the world as countries scrambled to assess the damage and formulate a response. From Asia to Latin America, nations found themselves caught in the crossfire, forced to choose sides in a trade war not of their making. Japan, a close U.S. ally, found itself on the receiving end of a 10% tariff, a move that sent shockwaves through its export-dependent economy. Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga announced plans to visit Washington in a bid to secure an exemption, but the prospects for success seemed dim. South Korea, facing a 25% tariff, promised an all-out response, signaling its intent to fight fire with fire. Seoul, heavily reliant on exports to both China and the United States, found itself in a particularly precarious position. Canada and Mexico, while exempt from the new tariffs, remain subject to existing levies on steel, aluminum, and automobiles. The trade tensions, while not as severe as those with China and the EU, nonetheless strained relations with two of America's closest neighbors. Section 8. The U.S. stands firm, a high-stakes gamble. Despite the global backlash and the turmoil in the financial markets, the Trump administration remained defiant, insisting that the tariffs were working as intended. The trade deficit, a long-standing source of frustration for Trump, had begun to narrow, albeit slightly, and the administration touted this as evidence that its policies were succeeding. "The tariffs are working," declared White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. "We're finally getting tough on trade, and other countries are starting to respect us again. The president's strategy is bringing jobs back to America and making our economy stronger." The administration, however, faced growing criticism from within its own ranks. Several prominent Republicans, concerned about the impact of the tariffs on businesses and consumers in their districts, expressed their unease, warning that the trade war could backfire, hurting the very people it was intended to help. the political calculus was complex. While the tariffs played well with Trump's base of supporters, who applauded his tough stance on trade, they risked alienating moderate voters, particularly suburban women, who were turned off by the president's confrontational style. Section 9. The road ahead, uncertainty looms. As the dust settled on Trump's tariff blitzkrieg, the global economy found itself at a crossroads. The trade war, once a distant threat, had become a stark reality, with far-reaching consequences for businesses, consumers, and the global political order. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty. The possibility of a negotiated settlement, while not out of the question, seemed increasingly remote, as both sides dug in, determined to prevail in a high-stakes game of chicken. The global economy, already grappling with the challenges of technological disruption and climate change, now faced a new threat. A trade war that threatened to unravel decades of globalization and plunge the world into a new era of protectionism and conflict. The stakes could not have been higher. The future of the global economy, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance as the trade war raged on, its ultimate outcome uncertain.